Welcome to eShe South Asia Union Summit led by women. I'm delighted to introduce our new panel for this hour titled Feminist Lens, Women's Visibility and the Culture of Silence, where our panelists will be looking at South Asian cultures through the feminist lens, cultures that pushed women behind curtains of invisibility and silence, where the age-old saying that women must be seen but not heard rings true. We have with us Najiba Laima Kasraee, an award-winning journalist of Afghan origin, now based in Prague. Najiba, who is a broadcaster, writer, and associate standard editor for Radio Free Europe, or Radio Liberty as it's known, is best known for her work in BBC World Service, where besides memorable interviews with world leaders such as Tony Blair, she founded the first language training for BBC Academy, which led to the creation of training resources in more than 42 vernacular languages for journalists worldwide. Thank you for being part of this panel, Najiba.
Thank you for inviting
me. We also welcome Mehr Tarar, columnist, writer, and TV show host from Pakistan. Mehr is an advocate for Indo-Pak peace and has written extensively on the need for people-to-people dialogue and an end to cross-border hostilities. Her book, Do We Not Bleed? Reflections of a 21st Century Pakistani, offers an insider's perspective on the state of the country today, from religious persecution to gender discrimination to even its Bollywood mania. We look forward to hearing your thoughts, Mehr. Joining us from Australia is Saloni Chopra, an actor, entrepreneur, and author of Rescued by a Feminist, an Indian fairy tale of equality and other myths, a collection of essays on a variety of topics, including gender equality, violence against women, and social media. Saloni has proactively used her social media following to raise voices for women's issues, such as safety and equal rights. She was one of the few courageous actors to open up about her experiences during the Me Too movement. We are so grateful, Saloni, that you were able to join us despite your time zone difference.
Thank you.
The session shall be moderated by producer, director, and head of distribution, syndication, and marketing for National Film Development Corporation, Deepti Chawla. Deepti is part of the 20% behind-the-scene women workforce of cinema industry. She has independently produced and directed films at Disney India and WISCOMP India. We welcome you, Deepti. I know that we cannot wait to begin this session. So I hand over the floor now to Deepti. Thank you.
Thank you, Pragya, and welcome everyone to eShe's and South Asia Unit Summit led by Women 2021. The topic is Feminist Lens, Women's Visibility and the Culture of Silence. Isn't it amazing that on one hand, women's bodies and faces are used to sell every single product on mass media, but on the other hand, in real life, they are kept silent and not permitted to speak even of injustices done to them. What women project in mass media and what happens to them are two different stories. Today, we speak to three strong women who are visible in the public eye with large social media presence, yet they have had to face their backlashes. We'll be speaking to women who have broken the norms in their own way and have paid the price for it. Let me begin with a senior journalist all the way from Afghanistan, the country that is currently in the public's eyes and hearts. Najiba, it was roughly around maybe 2 decades ago that you had interviewed the Taliban in Jalalabad with your face open. It's more guts than visibility. What's the difference in the Taliban then and Taliban now?
I remember my visit to Jalalabad and the questions that I had in my mind. This was just after they took Kabul, and we wanted to talk about what will be the situation for girls' education and whether women will be allowed to go to work. And I remember exactly the same questions are actually appearing today, 20 years after that period. And that is what we hear from the Taliban today, that they're working on a system for higher education, and that they are preparing offices where they can separate male and female. This was exactly what I was giving in Jalalabad when I arrived to speak to Commander Niazi, who was in control of the eastern provinces. He was only 25 years old at the time. He was recently killed just before Taliban took Kabul a few months ago. And in that interview, I remember the young boy standing behind him. And in particular, I remember one face. This boy must have been 15, 16 years old. And for him, it was an absolute taboo for a Pashtun woman to be asking his commander and asking, my question to the commander was, if your wife is ill, would you like to take your wife to a male doctor or female? And he immediately said, of course, to a female doctor. And I said, well, where would they come from if girls are not allowed? Unfortunately, the same questions are asked today. Your question whether the Taliban are different or not, I think they are more sophisticated. They are on Twitter, they are online. These are young men who know technology, and they know really well how to use social media for their message. However, they're governed by the same principle, which is a very traditional, conservative, I would say, not representing the true Islam, but it's more the culture that the woman should not be seen or visible. Now, my grandmother, who was born in Kandahar in 1905, used to say that my generation is more lucky than my mother. And I said, how? And she said, you know what? If a man was knocking your door, the woman was not allowed to say, to speak, because otherwise people will say, she's talking with a voice with strangers. Her voice has been heard by strangers. Unfortunately, we're going back to the area where a woman is silent. A woman is silent. And it's really difficult, I think, for Afghan women today. When 20 years ago, when the Taliban were taken from power, 9,000 schoolgirls remained in Afghanistan. This is the figures that we had. Today there are 4 million. We have 4 million girls enrolled in schools and in education. Half of them, the higher education, is stopped. Now, one can only hope that the Taliban today will consider and allow them. But I wouldn't see a huge difference between Taliban 20 years ago and now.
That's really surprising to know. Meher, we are so happy to have you with us. Please tell us what happened when women stepped out on the streets and made themselves visible. What happened at the Auric March earlier this year?
Hi, thank you so much for having me on the panel with these wonderful women. Uh, what happened, what Auric March did was that a lot of people thought that outside social media and outside, Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, people are not allowed to speak about their issues. I don't think that is correct. The only finally Pakistani women had a platform where they could get together, where they could speak up about their issues without feeling, without having a lot of judgment about what they were saying. They were, like-minded people assembled, and like-minded people started to talk about. Men became aware of what women were saying, and a large segment of women started to talk about so it's not really taken very seriously as far as the majority of Pakistan is concerned. But I think to highlight any issue, Twitter is the most important medium right now. So what happened was that people started to say that it's an elitist platform. It's not about normal regular Pakistani women. It's not going to help women outside the ones who can be seen, who are already visible on social media. And I the main cities of Pakistan. Even women who are not on social media, even women who do not belong to a certain class, materially, women who are doing basic wage jobs, who are working in other people's houses or in, working in shops, and even they become aware that there is a platform, that there is a place, that there are women, that there are organizations where they can go and talk about the injustices that they have never been able to talk about.
Why don't I quickly, take the conversation forward about, Twitter and it being a elitist platform to Saloni. Saloni, so good to see you on this panel. The internet
Thank
has
you.
actually given Indian girls and women at large to express themselves verbally and visually, besides many other mediums, in the past. But it's been the most strongest and effective medium. Do you think this new wave of visibility of women in the past decade is going to help men have a balance with their female counterparts? Do you think boys are going to have a healthy relationship with women in society as equals or better, or not have those gender biases? Or do you think things are getting worse and women are getting more objectified?
Hi, thank you firstly for having me here. Interesting question. So I think personally, it's great that this platform and having the internet has helped so many women come together and find each other and have a space where they can talk to each other. There are these communities, which I'm so grateful for, because I think growing up, I didn't have that, which a lot of young women have. Like, they have that now. But in terms of that helping men grow up, or little boys grow up to a generation where they consider, I don't know, women to be more equal, um, I think that having just internet and seeing, like, following women that you may agree with or their way of life isn't really enough. I don't think that is enough for men to see women as equal, because we need to make sure that more women are independent financially and they make enough money, because I think men for a long period don't actually consider women as equal, because women don't end up being financially independent. Like, they're very dependent on their partners or their fathers. And or in workspaces, after, this is something that I was talking to my partner about as well. And after women get married or have children, like, they're so isolated from society that I think it's a different kind of silencing, where we don't see stories of women in their 40s, 50s, 60s. We don't hear about what they're doing. It's always till 30s, and then they get married and have children and become mothers. They're not entrepreneurs, they're not business women. And I think that needs to change. I think we really have to focus on making sure that women aren't dependent in order for men to see them as equals.
That's so true. While we just wait for Meher to join us back, Najiba, let me ask you a question. Saloni is mentioning about this evolvement. Um, what has been the growth of Afghanistan? In this last decade. Do you see this development only in urban areas, or do you also see notable progress in rural areas and villages of Afghanistan? What are the reports like?
Well, I think the fundamental change that happened in Afghanistan, I mean, despite all the allegations of corruption, ethnic tension, and all of what the previous governments were accused of, the atmosphere has been created for women to grow. And I can give you some figures from what our reports were saying. I mean, this is from the time I was working at the BBC, and even now. We had, just before the fall of Kabul, 450 judges. Now, it is a rare thing in that region because by Islam, by Sharia, for women to be having the higher authority as a judge was a very rare situation in Afghanistan. Also, before I go to the rural area, I just want to give you a couple of figures. Now, 27% of the Afghan parliament were women. I mean, people initially were saying 20 years ago, oh my God, this is by quotation, and these women, they're just brought here But in 20 years, you really see voices that actually were raising from Afghanistan. This was not someone coming. I was speaking to the women's affairs minister, just before the fall of Kabul, and the figure that she gave me was incredible. I mean, we've got 5% police and military force and women in military and police, and that was quite rare. What has happened in the provinces? I think education was the biggest change that Afghanistan has seen. Just the mindset of people that changed. Recently, when cities were falling one by one, there was a report by Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, the Afghan service. A man came to Kabul from a south, really traditional place. And people are asking him why, the reporters were asking him why you're coming to Kabul. And he said, I want my girls to continue their education. And I don't want, their schools are now closed and the area is taken by Taliban. So he completely shifted from the village to come to Kabul. What has been achieved for women? I think first it's the opportunity for a woman to be able to go to school. It's the mindset that was changed across Afghanistan. I'll give you one example. When there was a few years ago, the election saga, which candidate is winning? Is it Ashraf Ghani or Dr. Abdullah? The commission, the election commission, the final authority was a woman. I know there are so many allegations against her, but just the fact that a woman is giving you the final figure, this is what the young people are seeing. This is what the men are seeing across Afghanistan, that a woman can be a judge, that a woman can be standing and giving, the final complaint and saying who's right and, who didn't obey the election regulations. This is the change that took place in the last 20 years. And it's really sad to see that women are now completely taken. I mean, there is no ministry for women now. The ministry is completely gone. It's 50% of the society, and I think it's very hard for. I think the Afghan women are still waiting and hoping that there might be some changes. As for the rural area, just a quick note from the reports that we had. 20% of civil servants were women, and this is not just Kabul, this is across Afghanistan. As a journalist, when we were speaking to people will criticize and say, well, no one could work in Kandahar. I mean, the situation was bad for women anyway. I have a relative, my second cousin, living in Kandahar, and she is a teacher in high school. And just before the fall of Kandahar, I called her and I said, what do you think? She said, we don't mind who. We reached to a point after 43 years of war that we just want this firing and shelling to stop, this bombing to stop. I don't mind what I put on my head. Do I go with a scarf or completely close my face? But unfortunately, and the current situation is that we see more war. It's now between ISIS and Taliban, so the war continues. Afghanistan in the last 20 years has seen an awakening, not only in the city, but also across the country.
That's heartening to know, but some very, scary facts. Meher, coming back to you, did the Auric March really take place earlier this year? Meher, can you hear us? Are you with us? We seem to be struggling with
I can't seem to see her screen.
Yes, no problem. Saloni, let me ask you, you've been raising feminist opinions on your web videos and social media posts, and even, with some strong text attached to it, and then this new book of yours at the same time. You're often criticized and trolled, and this is by men and women, for either posting provocative pictures or something that you have said. What do you think is the reason why people feel threatened when a woman is so confident in her body and expressing her sexuality through any form of art? I mean, also social media. What do you think?
Well, I think feeling threatened, firstly, is a very natural emotion that people feel. Human beings end up feeling very threatened because something that belonged to you is probably possibly being taken away. And for generations, men have just had control over women's bodies. Like they've been selling our bodies, they've been using it as a product, we've been objectified. I think the fact that I use certain photos or I talk about certain things when it comes to me having rights over my body and other women having freedom to feel the same thing is very confronting to people, because especially men, because they now lose that right over my body to objectify it, because it's not really objectification if I'm doing it. And I think that's scary for a lot of people, especially men who are not really raised to feel threat. They don't take threat in a very positive way. It's like a negative emotion. And that happening over generation, and now women suddenly wanting to take so much more space, wanting to make decisions over their own bodies, is, I think that really triggers people. Like, people are really scared of that. And the conversation can only change if we keep having it. I feel like we're also silencing women through social media, like platforms like Instagram, which are supposed to exist so that you can have a space and a voice. But at the end of the day, women are penalized for saying the things that they want to say, because we get shadow banned, or you're not seen as much, or like there's so many restrictions. So we forget that they're still run by the same people that don't want you to behave a certain way. It's a reflection of society.
Absolutely. Your last conversation was caught up by one person in the audience, and he had a very interesting thing to ask, which is how do you both, here, Najiba and Saloni, while we wait for Mehr to join, do you think women can raise better men, and make them better fathers and make them pro girls? I mean, how do you see that happening?
Absolutely. I think it's so important that the women raise a better son. I think, it comes from our culture, it starts from a very young age. I've seen in many Afghan families where the girl, for example, is 12 and the boy is 8, and the mother will say, go and give food to your brother, your brother is awake. Or, for example, the girl is asked to do the chores. It's the girl's, naturally, it's her, you're a girl, your brother is awake and he hasn't had breakfast. He can make a breakfast for himself. Why is it my job? They both go to school. They both, go through same thing. Why is the girl's job to polish his shoes and iron his clothes and say, your brother is awake and is still? This is the thing. This needs to start from a very young age. I write for children, and one of my story was about little fish living in the ocean, and it's actually about the house chore and why this is the job of the two little girls and not the boy. Women can have a big role in that. Also, just the fact how we admire when a boy is born. We have name for girls that says Bala Nasta, there are no more girls. So if a woman has 4 girls, the 5th one will be called Bala Nasta, there are no more, that's the last one. Or in Urdu or Farsi, will say Khatmi Dukhtar. It's almost why we do not cherish our own kind. Why? I understand that there's a pressure from the society, but I think that comes from now. Again, I'm going back to 100 years ago. Women, it's also our right. How much do we ask for this right? How much we're aware of even asking? And what about when an educated woman is joining a social media campaign against a famous, for example, famous Afghan presenter or writer? Where is that sisterhood that we always talk about? That are we really, really genuinely honest, and we really supporting each other as a group? That needs to be said. With the current situation in Afghanistan, I think many Afghans are actually questioning, what we need to change within us. How can we raise not only from this religious and atheist barrier, but also ethnic. But I think the biggest thing is the gender. How can we as a women, we're not asking men, we're saying how we can change. And we have a big role in that as well. as a mother of a young boy?
Meher, why don't you take this question and Saloni,
Yeah.
you may want to step in this because it's your thing that has, ignited this whole question.
I mean, I was raised by a single mother, and I think that's a really interesting conversation because my mom was very, very particular about making sure that me and my brother are raised with the same kind of upbringing. We were allowed to do the same things, and I see him around all the other men that I know, and I think he's a lot more vulnerable because he was raised solely by my mother, and she's vulnerable, and we communicate a lot as a family. And I think the role of like a child growing up, even though there's so much pressure on women as mothers to do it, I think it's important for fathers to step in as well and have that same vulnerability, because regardless of what your mother teaches you, I think at the end of the day you do relate. Like, I feel like I step into these shoes as a woman that I see women around me doing, and I relate to that far more than I relate to what men do, what we show men doing in social media and like movies and cinema. So I think in that sense, fathers, because that question was, what can fathers do? And I think fathers just need to be more part of a child's upbringing, where there's vulnerability and connections and conversations more than just, I don't know, more than paying the bills. And I think that really needs to change so that men can grow up and feel like they can also behave the same way.
Sure. I mean, but what are the tips, Najiba and Saloni? I mean, what is it that men can do? What can you think of at the tip of your hands? Do you want to tell something to men?
I think for me, number one would be like communicating with your children, because I have a lot of friends who don't have good relationships with their fathers. Their fathers will shower them with financial help, but they can't really communicate with them. They can't talk to them about how their day was, or they're not allowed to cry, or there's not a lot of empathy. Like, most men seem to not understand empathy, they get sympathy. So I think that would, like, vulnerability would be a really important thing for me.
Um,
Meher, would you like to come in? Meher, are you with us? Najiba, tips from you.
I think for fathers, I mean, as Saloni said, the key element is communication, and speaking to your child, not from the position that you are, I'm right because I'm your parent. I remember my father, he always said, when I was raising my two daughters, he would say, sit and talk to them. As a psychiatrist, he knew that this is such a key thing. He said, when you're, even they say in the office, if the manager is sitting in a higher chair, how you give feedback, don't sit in a higher position. And he said that's exactly the same with your children. Sit on the floor, he would always say to me, be on the same eye level, and then ask them. And he would always say, ask your daughter, what do they think? This is my view. What do you think? And when you give that sort of a possibility to a child, boy or a girl, it's not just from, I'm telling you, you need to do this. It's, this is my view. What do you think? And then they respect you, and they think we're friends, we're on the same level. And then the level of openness. I mean, I remember my father would encourage me to speak about politics where his friends would be sitting, and I was like 11, 12, and he turned to me and said, what do you think? It was quite rare, but that gives you an opportunity to consider yourself. And he would say, well, have you, did you read that book I'm reading? It's very interesting. Let me know what you think about it. And I'll be thinking, he's asking about my opinion about the book. So I'll go and really read it rather than it's a good book. Here's your pill. You need to have that. It's a communication. Children are very smart, and they would quickly adopt this formula of yes, yes, mommy, yes, yes, daddy, and then doing their own things. But if you respect them, if you open the door of, if your conversation is done through respect, then you become a friend. And I think that needs to be done with boy and with girl. Respect is the key.
Absolutely. I mean, and flash forward to so many years, we are seeing a feisty, fiery journalist sitting in front of us. So, as a byproduct of that conversation the father used to have with a little girl. Meher, we are so happy to have you back.
Okay,
Uh,
this is very
what do
strange.
you think?
Can you, if I can speak
No
quickly now.
problem. We are
The
still
key,
on the Yeah,
The thing,
sorry.
I'm going to, put all the questions together. That मेरा जिसम मेरी मर्जी created a lot of furor because men started to think, men in Pakistan began to think that women were talking about taking their clothes off. The problem is, in Islam, number one, you have to understand what happens in Afghanistan is an anomaly. Islam, as far as the Quran is concerned, there is no there is no worldly punishment for a woman for not wearing a hijab or for covering her body. Yes, it is mandatory for women to cover their bodies and to dress up in a certain manner, but there is nobody can force you to do it. Unlike what has happened in Iran, what happens in Afghanistan, and what happens in a certain part of Pakistan. It has always been a very strange scene as far as Pakistan is a very strange country when it comes to women, visibility, silence. Because I come from a feudal background. I grew up. I saw. My grandmother was very strong, but on the other hand, she always knew that she would do what the men in her family wanted her to. Her husband died at a young age, so it was just my two uncles, and she always treated them with a lot of respect, even though on her own she was a very strong woman, she was a very wise woman. The same goes for my aunts. Okay, my parents got separated at a young age, so I can't comment on that, but my aunts, they were all very strong. uh, Argumentative is
Verbally,
not
I'm verbal and
verbal. They were verbal. We always talked back. They never took anything lying down, but they were still treated badly. They were, for instance, if there was domestic violence, they lived with it. They just thought it was part of the game because divorce was not an option. Things changed. A lot of many women are divorced now. No, nobody points a finger at them. That's not a huge issue in Pakistan at all. But the problem in Pakistan even now is that any family, except for the very few, the very high, the upper class, the elite, when people who live in their own bubble, they travel abroad, they wear Western clothes, they party, they have their own thing. Nobody bothers them, nobody talks to them, nobody talks about them. I mean, they don't really care what the rest of society is saying. But otherwise, even now, it's a woman, a family's honor is still connected to a woman's character, a woman's name, woman's clothes, a woman's marital status, how she's observed, what people are saying about her. It is still, and a lot of bad things have. I believe a lot of rapes are reported in India, but unlike India, I believe a lot of bad things happen in Pakistan, but not much is reported because of the idea of shame and dishonor. Only people from the low income strata, they are the ones who come forward with rape reports or harassment because otherwise I have seen it all around me. I know women. I know women who are beaten by their husbands. I know women who have been sexually abused, who have been sexually harassed. I've had bad experiences myself. I We don't talk about these things. We can't afford to have that attention on ourselves. But it's honestly, it's not worth it. The fight is not worth it. The backlash would be so much, and the negativity would be so much, even from our own families. Like, for instance, if I say to my younger sister that I want to talk about something, she's just a year younger, but she's a normal, regular Pakistani housewife, and she'll be very upset. But okay, what does it matter? Just keep it to yourself. Allah hisab kar lega. If something bad has happened, just be quiet. And I can give you my own example of what happened to me in 2014 when I became a household name in Pakistan and India. I was devastated, but also so was my sister because she is married, she has a husband, she has in-laws, she meets a lot of people, and my name was on Pakistani television channels all the time, and there she was trying to explain to everyone what had happened. I have a brother who's in Foreign Office, but my son who was 14 years old wasn't affected. He didn't really care. My friends didn't care. A lot of strangers reached out to me. On the other hand, many friends deserted me. But women played a very strange role even then because instead of supporting me, you see, when you don't really know anything about a case, you don't really have to add you don't have to support the person, but you don't have to add bits from your side. But I think Saloni can understand. People who have had a media trial can understand that it's just there is so much noise, and I'll later I'll send you this article that I wrote for Daily for India Today. It was I think it was in 2019. I watched a documentary on Monica Lewinsky, and I wrote about it because I went through in 2014 what she went through in 1998. She was the first victim of the internet. She wrote that she wanted to kill herself, and I had Pakistani women saying to me that why don't you kill yourself? Why don't you die? Without knowing anything about my case, I was in Pakistan when something happened in Delhi. I had never met the woman who I was accused of, I mean, I was accused of murdering her. You people have seen, like, you have not been through what I've been through. So what I'm saying is, in Pakistan, it's not that women don't speak up. Women speak up. It's not that they're not allowed to do things. They work. They've always been strong. They've always been talking. They've always been talking back. They've always been standing up. But it's always been behind a curtain of invisibility. That don't talk about it to other people. Keep it to yourself. Don't. So honor and shame have been so uh, I mean, it has been entangled in such a complicated manner that there is no way that women would ever be able to talk about what happened to them. The way Saloni talked, the way because I followed her case, and I'm one of those people. I've written a lot on Me Too. I admire her courage. On the other hand, I can't do this. For instance, I'm 53 years old. 3-4 days ago, I was talking to a high level police official for something. I've never met him. It had something. My driver needed help with the license, so I called him up, and I don't know the guy. And as soon as I hung up, he texted me, "Oh, so you have a husky voice," and I don't know, it was. Can you imagine? At my age. I'm a gray-haired or middle-aged woman. He's never met me, but he decided to add his comment on that. Comment in that for it may be nothing. It may be nothing for most people in our society. They would say, "Think so? Kya ho gaya? What's the big deal?" I think it's a big deal. I'm very happy women have started to talk. Women like Saloni. There were so many brave women in India who started to talk. Misha Shafi have had a case against Ali Zafar. To date, everybody thinks she's a liar. I'm not saying Ali Zafar did what she has accused him of doing, but at least allow women to talk about it. That is the biggest thing in Pakistan. It's not that women don't talk. It's not that women are not strong. It's not that they are forced to, cover their heads or, everybody around me, they all wear Western clothes. They all study in co-ed universities, even for women from very conservative families. But then there is always stay quiet about what happens to you. They don't want us to talk about what happens to us. They don't. Okay,
Especially in time like this, Meher, when actually men are spoken badly if they do something, or even if they don't do anything. Women are threatened to rape and murder. I mean, if the situation is like that, we completely understand what you're trying to say. It's not that somebody does not want to speak up, but at what cost? And to what extent?
The thing is, it's Pakistani. It's not. I'll be very honest. I don't really know of many people who have been many women who've been killed in Pakistan for instance, wearing provocative clothes. For instance, something terrible. Of course, a very terrible murder happened. I think it was 2016 when Kandil Baloch was murdered by her own brother. And you see, again, media was involved in that because I used to watch her on TV. And okay, I don't own a television, but whenever I watch clips of her talking on television shows, and she would, she had literally locked horns with the Molana, with the Maulvi, and it all started. People started to. Her brother didn't care what she was doing and how she was working and where she was working. Suddenly, so many people started to talk about her and started to make him feel bad about what she was saying and what she was doing, that he eventually said, okay, let's get rid of her. ये तो बदनाम कर दिया इसने हमारे खानदान को सारा कुछ. And nothing ever happened to that guy. Nothing. What I'm saying is that women are not going to talk. Yes, they will talk anonymously, because I'm a victim of sexual abuse, and I throughout my life I thought I was the only one. Honestly, I thought maybe this only happened to me. Now I know that it has happened to literally almost every second woman in the world, from a family member, from a relative, from a film producer, from your boss, from anybody. It has happened to everybody. So now, what Me Too has done is it's united all of us. It has made us feel less alone. It has made us feel less guilty. Because most women start to blame themselves, that what did I do to bring this on myself? What was I doing? Especially somebody in working in the film industry. She would be the easiest target. On the other hand, as I was telling you, what happened to me was that I was very surprised by women's reaction to whatever happened to me. There were women like, for instance, Sharmeen Vachinoy. I didn't know her, but she reached out to me. I'll never forget that. Sherry Rahman, Senator Sherry Rahman, we follow one another on Twitter. So that was different. But she sent me a message. There were some men who sent me messages. There were many wonderful women from India who sent me messages. Women, of course, I didn't know. But
But Meher, speaking about wonderful women, I mean, it's understandable that Afghanistan, chooses to keep quiet. The women there feel threatened and they don't want to open up, owing to the danger that it can cause to them. But what about the rest of South Asia? Haven't you noticed that the most financially independent women, also in the rest of the world, forget South Asia, also choose to go along and keep quiet? Very quickly, Najiba, Saloni, and Meher on this one. Why?
I personally, if I can take this, like, I genuinely, because I know it felt scary before I spoke up as well, when the whole Me Too thing was happening. And I think one of the biggest issues is you don't want to bite the hand that feeds you. Like, being independent, being financially independent is rebellious enough for women right now. Like, this is the first time that so many of us have the opportunity to not have children, to not get married, to have a job. And make those choices. So, on top of that, speaking about abuse, especially within the industry or your workspace, there is a lot of shame involved, and you don't end up getting as much work as you would otherwise if you stay silent. So, I think in order to protect that work, because we haven't been that allowed to work for that many generations, and I think for me personally, it felt like just, I mean, I did do it in the end, but it just felt like having a job is rebelling enough. And I think so many women that I speak to choose to just be financially independent instead of trying to deal with the abuse that they're going through, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. Najiba.
Yeah, I mean, I will talk about the rebellion, the actual rebellion that happened after the Taliban took Afghanistan. Women coming, facing bullets in the street, and some women saying,
Meher,
"Well,
while
uh, we want to give peace a chance. Where we won't have, fighting." So definitely you see 50 women in Kabul coming and screaming and facing the bullets, but you also see a silent majority. And many of them,
yes.
when you speak to them privately, they will say, well, what will my voice make? I think the question here is, what will my voice or what will my tweet or what would my little line make? I better stay silent. I better not get involved because it's a bigger thing than me. But you know what? If we consider ourselves 50% of the society, we have to behave like 50% of the society.
That's so powerfully said. Meher, on a closing note. We can't hear Meher.
Now
Yeah,
I
I can't.
muted. Now I muted myself. I'm sorry. What I was saying was, what women go through in Afghanistan, hats off to them. They are braver than most women anywhere in the world. Also, what Saloni went through, that is something I can relate to. I've never really had to work in an office because I only worked in a newspaper and I mostly worked from home. I didn't experience that, but I know sometimes you need the job. There is no other option. people who are not in that situation do not understand. The same goes for women who are facing domestic abuse. There is no way out. You're getting beaten up by your husband, but you are not really educated to go and start your own life. You live in a country like Pakistan where you can't just go and become, a woman who works in a supermarket, or a woman who works in who takes up a low income job. Here you have to look at so many things. But and as far as sexual abuse is concerned, I am sure that 99.9% of women in Pakistan would never talk about it, because it's not even about what society would say. It's about what my mother will go through, what my brother will go through, what my father will go through, how society. You know what? The woman who was raped, and the most talked about case in Pakistan. I mean, if I mean, what I'm saying is, I don't think she got a lot of support from her husband or her in-laws. I don't want to go into details, but that's true of almost everybody in Pakistan. If, for instance, my niece, my 26-year-old niece, comes to me today and tells me that I have been sexually abused, what do I do about it? Yes, I'll do something about it on my own, but I don't think I can ever bring it on Twitter. I can ever talk about it, because I think honestly, since it's just women and all very brave women and outspoken, strong women in their own way, I do believe that social media is the last option. First, there are ways to sort things out one to one. You can confront the person, but not everybody has the option to. And if somebody has been silenced one way or the other for a number of years, please come on social media. Please shame these people. But that's what I'm saying. You have to be aware of what the price is going to be, because honestly, in our part of society, it's not even at times it's not even worth.
It
So
isn't.
all
It isn't
teach our children to be better human beings. Just last point, I have a 21-year-old son. He doesn't even understand what gender inequality is, even though yes, he grew up with women, but my brother was here. My brother-in-law has always been around. He did not grow up in a very happy house, but I guess I taught him things, and he understood them. So at the age of 13, he had this illegal Twitter account, and he tweeted, he was 13 years old, that why do we need an International Women's Day to show women that they matter, or that we should respect them. This is something we should do every day, without being told. He was 13 years old. So that's all we can do, pay attention to how boys are being raised. Thank you so
so very
much
true.
for
So very
finally.
true. This actually brings us to the end of the session and leaves our viewers to think about the fact that even in 2021, misogyny and online violence are a real threat to women.
Absolutely.
Thank you for being with us, and thank you, Najiba, Meher, and Saloni, for sharing your personal
Thank you.
experiences and enlightening us. Over
Thank
to
you.
you, Pragya.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
What a wonderful session. So I mean, we heard voices from Afghanistan and India and Pakistan, and it seems like, we're so different, but rural, urban, we heard like about invisibility of all kind of women. And the problems are more or less the same. It may vary in degrees, but they are the same. And unfortunately, in South Asia, we also have the invisibility in terms of unpaid work, wherein we work 5.5 hours more than men, but we end up still being somehow invisible in when it comes to the GDP. So there's so many aspects of invisibility. I'm so glad we talked about all this to the audiences. Our next session will start in next 11 minutes, and we hope you're still tuned. And we have another amazing panel coming up. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, Deepti. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.